The funny? No, no. Come on. Come on. I wish photographers would stop forcing people to use manual. You don't have to.
She say, do you love me? I tell her only partly. I only love my bed and my mom. I'm sorry. 50 dub, I even got it tatted on me.
What is the deal, beautiful people? My name is Ramon. This is LD Photo, part of the Lifestyles Defined group. And this is the channel where we talk about interesting topics around our passion, photography. This particular topic is one that I have seen for a long time. And I think this is controlled by the photography snobs. I think it's controlled by the people who just enjoy shaming others for whatever reason, and it's pertaining to the auto modes on your camera. And for a long time, I was under the impression that if you wanted to be serious about photography, you had to learn how to operate your camera in manual mode. In fact, when you become serious, let's say you shoot with an iPhone and you say, okay, I'm ready. Let me go out and get a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. And to most people, mirrorless and DSLR are the same thing. Whatever. Plenty of videos on the channel about that topic. So you go out and you buy this thing and you start doing some light research, and almost everything, everyone, everywhere says you have to learn manual mode, and that scares the bejesus out of a lot of people. It scared the bejesus out of me, and I used to get so frustrated. I would just leave it on. I would leave it on auto and let it do its thing, and I still to this day would not call that a mistake. I would say it was a different approach that allowed me to sort of attack photography from a different angle. What I mean by that, by leaving these decisions up to the camera on how it wanted to expose the shot, auto mode, my job, my only focus was to sort of be present in the scene and sort of work on my composition. And early on, I was able to grasp that concept in photography. It didn't really matter what camera you used or what settings you used. It was all about the composition of the shot. And sure, you had to have a great vision of what you were capturing, but the composition is probably not only the most difficult thing for me, personally speaking, in photography, and I'm guessing a lot of other people too, because even to this day, I see a lot of people getting composition wrong, and it's hard to say get it wrong, but there's some dope pictures out there with dope edits and dope subjects, but the composition is just off. 2 for 3 doesn't make it a bad picture, but to me, composition is the most important thing. And grasping composition was such a long, hard road that I was very fortunate to have tackled that first. And my advice to people wanting to get into photography has nothing to do with the auto modes or shooting in manual. I tell people, you leave that thing right where it is on automatic and you worry about the composition of your shot. Now, as you start to compose things, you'll get this familiarity with your camera and how it works. But it's when you start to attack your creative freedom, your creative vision, that's when you start to need to develop a higher learning of the exposure triangle. And the exposure triangle, for those of you who are not sure, there's three main things that sort of or three main aspects of your camera that come together to make your shot. It's going to be your f-stop or your aperture, it's going to be your shutter speed, and it's going to be your ISO. And these things may sound very difficult at first, but I assure you, if you tackle them one by one, it's super easy. Now, look at your aperture or your f-stop. What that does is that opens or closes the lens, or controls the amount of light that comes in from the lens onto the sensor to capture the image, right? And a great great byproduct of that, or a great circumstance of that, is you can create this depth of field. So the smaller the aperture, you sort of get this tunnel vision, and you get this what's called depth of field. And that gives you this really nice, we call it separation, where if you focus on something in the foreground and the background sort of just falls out and it's blurry. And then if you look at your shutter controls how long the shutter on the camera is open to record light. So the longer you leave it open, the more light, the more information it can gather. And also when you the shorter, the really fast shutter speeds, 1/500th, 1/2000th, it's just a blink of an eye. That those sort of shutter speeds freeze. They freeze subjects. They tend to freeze subjects, and it can just give you this really dope like stop motion thing, like some sort of magic. You just freeze in time. And then your ISO is all about the cameras, or the sensor, however you want to say it, sensitivity to light. And the lower your ISO, it's the lowest possible setting to light, and the lowest amount of noise. But as you increase your ISO, its sensitivity sort of increases, so it can take on more light, but it kind of causes more noise as a circumstance there. And yes, these things can be complex. Together, that's where the magic happens. It's the different settings. Now, what automatic mode does is the camera handles all three of these aspects best it can. And that's usually okay for most people. Even today, for me, it's okay. But when you, like I said, when you start to create this, or when you start to develop this creative vision, you see, you're doing your street photography, right? And you see a cab coming down. What do you want to do? What do you want to portray as the photographer here? Do you want to freeze this cab in motion and just slow down time and just show this tack sharp cab hauling ass down Fifth Avenue? Well, your priority here is shutter speed, right? And there's a mode for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But then you sort of see the same cab, but you want this cab to sort of stand out, and you want all the background around it to sort of disappear. You want this cab to be the thing that pops out in your image. Well, your priority here is aperture priority, that depth of field we talk about, right? And it's interesting to see when you shoot auto, you start to say, but what if I want to slow down the cab? What if I want to speed up the cab? What if I want to just focus on the cab and blur everything out? And this is when you start to realize, wow, automatic can't do that for me. But there are two other modes that people again poo-poo, but they still are automatic modes. The first of which is probably my favorite, and that is the aperture priority mode. Aperture priority mode, what this does is it keeps the ISO on auto, and this is an asterisk, and I'll talk about this after. It keeps the ISO on auto, and it keeps the shutter speed on auto. The only variable you can adjust in the ISO triangle, or the exposure triangle, on aperture priority is your f-stop value. So this gives you it's locked into your creative choice. You're pretty much saying, I want to get this one thing in focus and have everything blurred out, or I want to get everything in focus, right? So if you're shooting a prime and you do something like you go down to aperture 2.8 or 1.4, whatever, that's your depth of field image where everything is blurred out except that cab. But let's say you want to just capture the cab in the scene of everything, and you just want everything to sort of be absorbed. You would go up to about maybe f8, f10, maybe even like a f12, and that would then capture the entire scene. Now, going back to the other example, what if you want to freeze that cab in motion? That auto mode you would use is shutter priority. And shutter priority is sort of the opposite. It's the brother of aperture priority. So when you're shooting shutter priority, what you're really doing is the camera is allowing you to only change variables on your shutter speed. So the aperture and the ISO are all controlled by the camera. So based on whatever shutter you choose, the camera is going to choose a comparable aperture and ISO setting to give you a well-exposed shot. And here you go again. You have two choices on shutter priority when it comes to this cab, right? Do you want to freeze it like Matrix style? Well, then you know you need to move up your shutter speed to something like 1/1000th, even like a 1/500th, 1/750th, somewhere around there, and that's gonna boom, blink of an eye. But what if you want to capture the cab in motion, right? And you can see the wheels are spinning, they're blurred out though, so there's obvious motion. Well, then you can come down to something like a 1/160th. But what if you want to get even more creative and you just want to have this yellow blur going down the street? Well, then you should probably leave your shutter open for about a second and then close. So you'd be at a second, right? And this is how these modes work. There's a program mode, which I don't know. I still don't understand what the hell the point of that is. You guys hit the comment section, explain the program mode to me, because I've done so much research on program mode and I still don't understand it. I still don't see the benefit of using program mode over manual, but program mode would technically be the fourth auto mode. So for me, there's the two auto modes that I really, and I do use these, right? And I don't like when, I go to these Instagram meetups and I talk to these photographers and they'll take a look at my camera and oh, you don't shoot manual? What? No, I shoot manual when I need to shoot manual. You know when I shoot manual? When I'm in a controlled space. So when I'm home and I'm doing my low-key portraits or I'm doing flash photography, then I'll shoot manual because I need my ISO to stay the same and I need to control the amount of light coming from the flash. When you're doing flash photography, I believe the saying a shutter speed controls the intensity of the light. I think that's what it was. I got it in my notes somewhere. I got to do a video on that, but different time. If I'm in a controlled space, I'll shoot manual. Other than that, I can't be bothered because going back to that asterisk I told you about, ISO is a really interesting one. Before when I was hitting the streets, now learning about 2 years ago, I would keep my ISO on 100 or 50. They say, oh yeah, you got to keep it low noise. And it was so annoying because a lot of my pictures weren't exposed right. And it was just tough to shoot. What I then figured out was auto ISO. In auto ISO, I would tell it, okay, camera, you can use this range of ISO settings. Any ISO setting within this range. So anywhere from 50 to 1600. And that's where it would use it. So if I came to a shot that needed more than 1600 ISO, I know I wasn't doing something right. Because between my aperture setting, and I usually shoot primes, so I'd have a lens wide open at like 1.2, especially at night, or 1.4, sorry, and you gotta shoot fairly wide open at night if you're gonna get a lot of that light. And I would just let the ISO do its thing. So for me, when using the shutter and aperture priority mode, I usually set my ISO mode to always, but I give it a nice range. And it's up to you to do the research on what the, how high you can take your ISO without introducing a lot of grain and noise. I think my A7 Mark II, I can probably push it to like 6400. Very rarely do I do that. My Olympus, yeah, okay, that might go for the I'm pushing it at 1600, and that's pushing it. So yeah, I just wanted to get across to you guys that the auto modes are not, it's not a disgraceful thing. Don't let anyone shame you. In fact, like I said, when you start to notice, I call this hitting the ceiling, right? When you start to notice that the automatic mode just isn't giving you what you want, this is when you take that stepping stone to aperture and shutter priority. And each one is set up in a way where it's up to you and what you want to do to which mode you get. And that's why I introduced the concept of the cab on the street. And I think as a whole, we should all just stop shaming people that shoot on any type of auto mode. I mean, sometimes I'm out. I work long hours, and sometimes I'll take a stroll after work, and I don't feel like fighting with settings. I don't feel like thinking, right? Like I said, I have so much energy, and I figure, all right, let me go get some shots, and let me go capture something real quick. But I don't want to sit there and just overthink things, right? I want to worry about the composition, and that's it. So sometimes I'll put the camera on auto mode, or I'll have it on aperture priority, where I only need to worry about one thing, right? And that's just one decision on, do I want everything in focus or just the subject in focus? So it's been extremely handy for me. I've done a bunch of professional work, and by professional work, I mean I'm selling my work, or a client paid me for this work. I've done it in aperture mode or shutter mode. It depends on what I'm doing. And I don't want anyone to you're now getting into this and you feel the need because somebody out there said you got to learn manual mode. I mean, learning manual mode is dope, right? And I can shoot manual. You can describe a scene to me and I'll tell you the manual settings for it. It's not a big deal. But because I can do it doesn't mean I have to do it, right? And because I'm not shooting manual doesn't mean my shots aren't coming out the way I want them to. So that's my message to you guys. I want to know what you think in the comment section down below. I want you guys to like the video if you like it. And if you'd be so kind, share it with a friend. Like I said, my name is Ramon. This is Lifestyles Defined. I'm out of here. Peace.
Well, I guess. And the reason we started Lifestyles Defined is because if we weren't on camera arguing about these things, the technologies, the phones, the iPhones, the Androids, the cameras, the games, we'd be on the phone arguing about it. We'd be in each other's houses arguing about it. So why not just put it in front of a camera for everyone to enjoy it the way we do? That's what Lifestyles Defined is all about. We just